Hi everyone, welcome back. I want to take the opportunity to go over a little bit more about that 14th Amendment we talked about last time. Um, the citizenship and the standing and the due process and all these things that we think that the 14th Amendment did or didn't do, it gets complicated when we think that a piece of paper or some law or some Congress wrote something and then all of a sudden it changes everything for us. Well, it doesn't really do that. It doesn't all of a sudden change, it just changes the presumption. So when we go back and look at what happened with the 14th Amendment, it is what changed the presumption from that we go by the Constitution and everyone's free and that the judges and representatives represent the people. The 14th Amendment comes along and says, well, basically everyone has to take care of themselves, due process, because before the 14th Amendment we had the states had all their rights. And the states would give the individual their protection. But basically the 14th Amendment said, well, the states aren't there to protect the people. The people have to protect themselves. So how this came about was with the war, and after the war, the Civil War that is, the war for states' rights, so we're really talking about states' rights, not individual rights, and the states lost their rights. And one example of that is that right after the war, when they were going to vote on the 14th Amendment, the 11 states in the South didn't get to sit and vote. So now they've taken 11 states' rights away to vote on the 14th Amendment. They would have voted it down. Okay, so it passes. Now, last time we talked a little bit about it, and what it says, those persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to. Now, that's the catcher there, but what I'm going to tell you this time, last time we talked about that, does it put you subject to? What makes you subject to? Well, that all becomes evident in the next line, where regardless of what it is, the states shall not deny any person in their jurisdiction the due process and equal protection of the laws. And what's due process? Due process is the right of the individual to have a hearing and be noticed of that hearing and have a right to go to court and subpoena witnesses in his defense. So this right hasn't been lost. The state's rights were lost. The state had rights that were given to it. Well, actually, no, it had the rights. In the federal Constitution, they deny certain rights to the states. That's at Article 1, Section 10. Now, there's a really good case. I think it was out of Ohio, and it's Diet versus Turner. You can Google that to find it, but it's Diet versus Turner, and the Supreme Court judges of that state were complaining to the Supreme Court judges of the United States, or what they call the Supreme Court, that the rights of the states were taken away. Okay, so basically all the rights of the states were taken away by the 14th Amendment, and where did they go? That's the question. Do they go to the federal, or do they go to the people? Because the powers are in three different places: the federal, the state, and the people. And was it the 10th Amendment that said that those powers not delegated to the federal nor denied to the state are reserved to the state or the people respectively? So each individual then became a state. 14th Amendment basically moved us all into that. So if you want rights, you have to move forward with them. That's basically what the 14th shows. Now, some people think that the 14th Amendment changed all this stuff. And in a way it did, but not really, because the real amendment that you want to look at is the 11th Amendment. That's what changed all the judicial power when you go back and look at that. Where's the judicial power of the United States? And then the 11th Amendment limits that to certain places. Then the 14th Amendment says, well, if you're subject to the jurisdiction of the state, and if you're subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, then you're a citizen and you're subject. However, no state shall deny any person in the state the due process of law. So it's that due process of law that each individual is guaranteed. Where before, the states were guaranteed due process before the 14th. Then they're not. They're required to give each individual due process. So when you understand this, they're shifting the power of the state to the individual. And if the individual doesn't take it, then it'll go to the federal jurisdiction, and the agents will exercise it against the individual, for them, to them. So that's why each one of us has to understand the due process that we're entitled to. And we can ask for a hearing. And the hearing has to be given by the agency. Okay? And the agency is the ones that are doing everything. The agents are part of an agency. And that's why the agent has a responsibility to the agency and the individual, but it's to the individual through the agency. So the agency is who's required to give the hearing. And we're finding out now that no one ever asked for it. And when we ask for it now, the lawyers are trying to find out which agency is supposed to give the hearing. Because they've never done it, because no one's ever asked for a hearing, because that's due process and that's constitutional, and agencies don't do constitutional law. So the agents don't know anything about constitutional law. But the key is the constitutional law means administrative process. So the agents have to know the administrative process, and they have to give it to us because that's the due process. Okay, so we still have our rights under the 14th Amendment. It just made it that we have to ask for them and we have to call for the hearing. Whereas prior to the 14th Amendment, one of the representatives or one of the judge would indicate that that had to happen. So the 14th basically put the responsibility squarely on the individual when it was on the individual prior, but he could get a representative to help him out. But the war between the states was really a war against the rights of the states. The states lost, so that left it up to us individuals. So each one of us is like a state. And if we understand that, then we can move the process forward, but it's responsibility of each one of us. And in order to do that, we have to know how the process works. And they haven't been teaching the process since the early 30s. So even the lawyers that did learn the process are over 80 years old now, and they've retired, and no one knows this process. And no agent has ever done it, and so it's a whole new thing when someone requests a hearing and wants due process, and this is where we're at today. So I've got a couple cases where I've asked for a hearing, and the lawyers are running around saying that they've never done this and they can't find it, but they'll get back to me. So I expect to hear pretty soon, and then we'll determine where the jurisdiction lies and how we're going to proceed with an administrative process to get constitutional rights. So thanks for being here, and we'll talk more about this and some other things next time. All right? See you next time.